Rain streaked the glass, blurring the city skyline into gray smears. Andrew stood motionless by the window, his palms flat against the cold pane. On his desk sat a calculator, a thick ledger, and a coffee mug with a ring of dried brown residue at the bottom. The office hummed with the sound of frantic keyboards and muffled telephone calls, yet he felt miles away. When the clock on the wall jumped to 5, the floor erupted into movement. Chairs scraped back, voices rose. Andrew did not rush. He packed his bag with deliberate, measured movements, tucked his chair neatly under the desk, and nodded to the people who did not look up. To them, he was a fixture of the room, a background object like a printer or a filing cabinet. He stepped out into the damp street, the cold air hitting his face as he walked away from the building. No one noticed the envelope he pulled from his inner pocket, already prepared for the bank. Every Friday, the ritual repeated. Every Friday, the world remained oblivious to the numbers shifting in his account. He merged into the evening crowd, a ghost in the machine, disappearing into the city before the lights of the office had even begun to dim. 20 years prior, the view was not a skyline but a brick wall inches from the window of a cramped apartment. A younger Andrew sat at a folding table, staring at the numbers on his first real paycheck. It felt like a triumph. He spent the money on a dinner at a high-end bistro, chasing the temporary glow of being seen in the right places. He was flush with the feeling of arrival. Then, he returned to the office and met an older colleague near the coffee machine. The man looked at Andrew, dropped a single sentence on his desk, and walked away. Most people spend their raises. Wealthy people invest theirs. The words lingered, sharp and uncomfortable. That night, Andrew bypassed his usual routine and opened a battered book on financial philosophy. He flipped through pages until he stopped on a line that made the room feel suddenly quiet. Success is created through consistent actions repeated over time. He looked at the paycheck, then back at the book. He realized the dinner, the status, the rush, it was all consuming capital instead of creating it. He closed the book, picked up a pen, and calculated a new path. The transition was immediate. He decided that night to test the theory, stripping away the impulse to display wealth in favor of building it. The next payday, Andrew did not wait for the rent or the grocery bill. He moved a portion of his salary into an investment account first. The remaining cash felt thin in his palm, barely enough to cover the basics. The first year was a gauntlet of quiet deprivation. He watched his friends pull up in new vehicles, their exhaust fumes hanging in the air as they debated which tropical resort to visit next. They pushed him to join, to upgrade his lifestyle, to match their pace. Each invitation felt like a test. He checked his balance. It grew by only a few dollars, a pathetic, slow climb that mocked his sacrifice. He felt the pull of the speculative stocks his peers bragged about in the break room, their voices filled with the intoxicating promise of overnight riches. His hands itched to chase the same gamble. Instead, he kept his head down, staring at the ledger until the numbers blurred. He stopped viewing his investment as an optional choice. He treated it like a monthly bill, a debt he owed to a version of himself he had not yet met. He paid it before he ate. He paid it before he slept. He walked past the showrooms and the travel agencies, feeling the weight of the gap between his current reality and his chosen future. It was not a grand gesture. It was a grinding, silent, daily refusal to be anything other than consistent. 5 years dissolved into 10. The initial sting of deprivation faded, replaced by the rhythmic pulse of the calendar. Andrew stopped calculating the growth daily. He stopped checking the balance for a spark of excitement. The ledger became a simple, mechanical extension of his routine. When the market shifted, he did not look for news or listen to the panicked theories echoing through the office. He viewed the fluctuation of numbers on his screen with the same indifference he gave to the weather. He moved his funds on the same day, at the same hour, with the same precision. The urge to chase trends died out, starved by his lack of attention. He treated the habit like breathing. It was not a decision anymore. It was the architecture of his week. He saw coworkers cycle through phases of obsession and despair, their moods tethered to the volatility of the ticker. Andrew remained anchored. He automated the transfers and closed the browser. The grinding power of compounding interest took over. Working in the dark, away from the chatter of the break room. He was no longer trying to build a future. He was simply maintaining a system that had become his reality. He watched the years pile up, one consistent entry after another, until the process itself was the only life he knew. The office was a hum of predictable activity until the screens turned red. It started as a ripple, then a wave. A single alert pinged, then another. The break room door swung open as coworkers flooded in, their faces drained of color, eyes locked onto the scrolling tickers. The air thickened with the smell of stale coffee and sharp, sudden desperation. Someone stood up so fast their chair clattered against the floor, a jarring sound that echoed through the silence. They were shouting, their voices tight and thin, tracking the freefall of stocks they had counted on for years. Figures were vanishing. Savings were dissolving into digital dust. One colleague gripped the edge of a desk until his knuckles turned white, his breath hitching in ragged, uneven gasps. Another sat frozen, staring at the terminal as if the data might reset itself if he only waited long enough. No one spoke of the future anymore. They spoke only of the loss, the immediate, crushing weight of their shrinking accounts. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in as the panic became a physical presence. Andrew sat at his desk, the only still point in a room swirling with frantic energy. He watched the frantic clicking of keyboards and the frantic pacing of feet, listening to the desperate, jagged rhythm of people watching their foundations crumble in real time. The panic hit a fever pitch. A phone slammed against a desk, the plastic casing cracking under the impact. People were abandoning their terminals, their hands trembling as they liquidated their holdings to stem the bleeding. The air vibrated with the sound of desperate voices and the frantic, rhythmic tapping of keys. Andrew did not flinch. He leaned forward, his focus narrowing to the flickering green and red numbers on his monitor. He watched the graph plummet, a jagged line carving a path toward the bottom. Others saw catastrophe. He saw an entry point. He pulled his keyboard closer, the sound of his keystrokes steady and deliberate against the chaotic backdrop of the room. He did not rush. He did not sweat. He clicked the buy button, confirming the transfer of funds into the very assets everyone else was discarding. He watched the confirmation window blink into existence. The trade executed with a soft, final chime. Around him, the room was still screaming, but he simply sat back and exhaled. He had purchased what the market feared. He had turned the collapse into a foundation. As the ticker continued to drop, he closed the window, turned his chair, and looked out the window at the rain, leaving the frantic energy of the office behind him. Years blurred into a cycle of seasonal shifts and market patterns. He ignored the noise of speculative trends and the lure of quick gains. He kept his head down, treating every deposit as a non-negotiable debt to his future self. The office routine remained constant while his private ledger quietly swelled. Then came the afternoon that broke the pattern. He sat at his terminal, the office around him a dull hum of mundane tasks. He logged in, expecting the usual fractional increase. Instead, the screen displayed a figure that stopped his breath. The comma sat in the right place. 7 digits. He blinked, pulled his glasses off, and rubbed his eyes. He leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking in the silence. He refreshed the page. The number held. There was no chime, no fanfare, just the steady pulse of a blinking cursor. He tapped his fingers on the desk, the rhythmic sound marking the end of a 2-decade climb. He did not call out. He did not lean over to show his neighbor. He simply watched the screen until the weight of the moment settled into his chest. It was a victory measured in patience, a mountain scaled one small step at a time. He closed his eyes, let out a slow, steady breath, and felt the quiet, immovable foundation he had built for himself. Andrew closed the laptop. The screen went black, erasing the 7-digit figure. He did not look back. He stood up, gathered his few items, and walked toward the exit. The office was a hive of frantic activity, people chasing deadlines and status, but he moved through them like a ghost. He reached the glass doors and paused. Through the pane, the city was being painted white by a sudden heavy snowfall. He pushed the door open. The sharp, frozen air hit his face, instantly stripping away the stale heat of the workspace. He stepped onto the pavement. The snow crunched under his boots, a rhythmic sound that felt like a clean break from the past. He walked down the center of the sidewalk, his pace steady, his head held level. A group of people rushed past him, hunched against the wind, their faces tight with stress, not seeing the man who had already reached the destination they were still struggling to find. He did not need their recognition. He did not need a celebration. The freedom was not in the money itself, but in the silence of knowing he no longer required the world's permission to live on his own terms. He walked into the white haze, fully detached, finally his own master. The office was still a blur of motion, but Andrew sat perfectly still. He was clearing his desk for the final time when a young intern leaned over the partition. Her eyes were wide, tracking the steady, calm way he organized his few belongings. She had watched him for months, the quiet consistency, the lack of panic during market dips. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "How did you do it?" she asked. Andrew stopped. He did not look at the screens or the frantic colleagues surrounding them. He looked at the empty ledger on his desk. He tapped his pen against the paper, a slow, deliberate sound that cut through the office chatter. He looked up, his expression neutral, devoid of pride or malice. "There is no secret," he said. The words hung in the air, simple and heavy. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on hers. "I just stayed in the game when everyone else got bored." He watched her face. The confusion shifted into a realization that seemed to stop her breathing. She stared at him, waiting for a complex formula, a hidden trick, or a stroke of luck. But there was nothing else to give. He had provided the truth, and for the first time, the noise of the office seemed to drop away, leaving only the weight of his words. Andrew stood up. The chair creaked against the carpet, a sharp sound that signaled the end of his tenure. He smoothed his hands over the desk, leaving the surface clear of any personal marks. He reached up, adjusted his tie with practiced precision, and checked the knot one last time. The intern was still standing there, frozen by the reality of his departure. Andrew offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He did not say goodbye. He did not need to leave a legacy. He turned and walked down the central aisle. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a clinical glow on the rows of monitors. He passed the break room where the same debates raged, the same panic flared, and the same shortcuts were debated with feverish intensity. He walked past the glass partitions without glancing left or right. His pace was steady, rhythmic, and entirely his own. He reached the heavy main doors, pushed them open, and stepped out. The city air was crisp and biting. He did not look back at the building. He turned his collar up against the wind and began walking toward the life he had constructed, one paycheck at a time, leaving the noise of the world behind him.